I've been putting off this series for a long time now because of this very episode. I thought it was way too sappy, and I felt if I released this Mind episode it would look like I'm seeking attention and pity, which I really don't ever want, even though every episode sounds like it. I kept rewriting unsatisfying scripts until I gave up and let it collect dust along with all the other episodes, since I wanted to do each one in order. One day I told myself that I'll never be comfortable with the script for this episode since Eternity deals with an uncomfortable subject in the first place. Realizing there was no way around it, I'm finally talking about the Path of Eternity today. Following the release of Blood Moon, I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue with the allegory anymore. If I were to continue, I wanted to make it differently. I like working with trilogies, so I decided to make the Paths trilogy. As with almost anything I do, the Paths trilogy ended up being completely different from what it initially was when I first started thinking about the new story. I'll first explain the meaning behind the trilogy itself, then I'll delve into the intricacies of Eternity. After Blood Moon killed my motivation for montaging, I was faced with three main choices. I could continue doing these Machinitages until Halo 6 or whatever it's called, where I could hopefully expand and do other kinds of videos. I've always wanted to do more than Halo edits, but I'm a bit afraid of the reaction I'd get from that. Desolation, my first Paragon edit, doesn't really count because it got a huge boost in views from the Paragon subreddit. If I were to stay on my current Machinitage path, I would hate myself for it. When it comes to Halo, I find myself in the cycle of hating the game because of the FFA grind, not playing for a long time, then somehow finding the motivation to play again. Even with the motivation I get nowadays, playing free-for-all and making all the story scenes only to encounter another multitude of issues becomes harder for me to endure each time. I've also talked about my hatred for free-for-all more than enough, so I'll leave it at that. That is the Path of Eternity. My next choice would be to let go of Machinitages for a while and do other things instead of doing the same kind of videos forever. Try new editing styles, try editing other Halo games, or maybe just different games like Desolation. Maybe after experimenting for a few months I would realize that there are other types of videos I enjoy making more than Machinitages. That is the Path of Divergence. My final choice was to simply stop doing anything at all, put the allegory and my channel to rest until I found motivation that lasts more than a day. If I did that, I could play games to enjoy them instead of playing them just for content creation, because essentially that's all I do for Halo 5 anyway. I would only ever get on to get clips or to record stuff. I would never actually enjoy playing the game. That is the Path of Silence. In a way, I chose all three. I followed Eternity because I ended up finishing the allegory with the Path of Silence, although they weren't all Machinitages, they all shared the same atmosphere. And it was all Halo 5, so of course I struggled while making them. I followed Divergence because between Blood Moon and Eternity, I made a few edits that are quite different from the Machinitages like Black Magic, Celes, and Roses, and now I've been moving on into different kinds of content as well. I won't go into detail about the other two paths since they have their own separate videos, so for now let's get right into Eternity. After making these Machinitages for such a long time, I realized that they were almost always in the same three parts: Machinima beginning, montage middle, Machinima ending. Furthermore, I would rush the Machinima parts so that it could fit into the song, and I find myself cutting out multiple shots and scenes for the sake of time. Eternity essentially still has that same structure, except I made the effort to put more of the story forward, so I added another Machinima scene in the middle to sort of cut between the montage, and I focused on the story more than the montage itself. It was also the first of a trilogy, so I wanted to make sure this new setting and story was well established by focusing on the Forge environment and how the story flows. In a series this complicated, continuity errors are bound to happen, and of course I'm always going to make mistakes. So if I realized there was something wrong or something I didn't like, I could easily just add something else in a later episode. An example of this is the doors. Early on you could walk into each path and there would be sort of a Covenant grav lift at the end, but by the time I made Silence I didn't like how it looked, and I changed it to make it look more like a huge portal. So there's slight changes like that that sort of don't affect the story itself but just make it look better as a whole. There are some things you just can't patch up though. I can't just say, oh, in Eternity the temple has 2 paths, but I feel like adding another episode to the series, so let me just add another door in the next episode. Another thing I realized I never did was have dialogue in my Machinitages, and no, Minplis's M3 does not count. Anyway, onto the story itself. The main fragment of the story is Achilles, obviously because he has the Achilles helmet. Since I wanted to split from the Moon trilogy but still have the same story elements, I decided to make this story happen in some kind of parallel universe. In the beginning we're shown a skyline view of the Void. Just like before, I decided to give it a visual upgrade instead of keeping it as a boring black background. Next, we see Achilles in the Void being dragged away. He was supposed to be dragged away by Faceless Black, but when Nick and I were body acting, he didn't change his armor, so I just left him in there. Consider it an Easter egg, I guess. Achilles wakes up in a confused panic and turns to the burning city. I put the city and the moon in there to show how this trilogy is still connected to the previous one. The most important thing about this new void is the endless ocean. It still looks like a void because it's vast and empty, but it also gave me much more possibilities regarding what new effects and objects I could build in this new space. The old black background I had was basically 2D. It was hard to get a sense of depth and hard to be creative within that space. This new environment solved that problem and allowed me to do much more in the void if ever I needed to, and you can see me take advantage of that in Silence. Achilles begins to walk towards the city, but he's pulled into another part of the void I call the Path Temple. Contrary to the Moon Temple from the Moon trilogy, I gave the Path Temple a sort of ancient ruin look to show that this isn't the same trilogy we're dealing with anymore. When I first created this new trilogy, I no longer wanted to deal with the moon fragments, although in Silence I changed my mind and I made a lot of story changes at the end. This time Achilles has a new enemy named Faceless Black. Something's always been weird about me ever since I was a kid, but with some help, mainly a psychologist, I found out I had depression and depersonalization disorder. And Faceless Black is the embodiment of all that. Moving on, Achilles is stumbling around in the void, trying to find a way out. Then Faceless Black speaks to him and says, "You alone will never escape from the path of eternity." This means I will never get out of depression by myself. Having everything inside of you and living with it alone is never good. I needed help. I can help you return. Originally, this line was I can help you return, but at a cost. I cut that last part out for some reason, but when Faceless Black says that, he means that he can give Achilles an easy way out of the void in which he's lost, a way to finish the path of eternity. This is the dark temptation of suicide hiding inside my mind, trying to convince me to just end my misery. Faceless Black can free me, but he offers that freedom at a cost which isn't worth his help. At the time Path of Eternity was made, I was still fighting the Faceless on my own. Just as I'm at the Void's door, about to escape his grasp on my own, I find myself right back where I was again. Back to the endless struggle between Faceless Black and I. Like the other attempts at escaping the void, I resisted the darkness. But like the other attempts, I merely became more broken than before. And the cycle repeats.